Defending trust, we stand our ground, exposing truth where lies are found. Fiduciary frontline, strong and true, fighting for justice and breaking through.
Welcome to Fiduciary Frontline, the video podcast where licensed fiduciaries can come together to grow stronger through every challenge. I'm your host, Robin O'Connell. The role we play and the job we do, and the level of responsibility we carry can all be contributing factors to a very stressful workday. But more often than not, the stress of our job is not caused by the work we do or even caused by the clients. More often than not, it is caused by an outside source, a party to your client's case, an interested party that has an opinion, but no legal authority and ultimately no responsibility for the decisions being made on behalf of and for your clients. Very early on in my career as a licensed fiduciary, I faced some very dark and trying challenges. I fought hard and I stood my ground, and I believed myself to have been a worthy adversary. But during this very dark and trying time, I felt that I faced a lot of it alone. And by the time it was all said and done, there was no true vindication for me and no consequences or recourse directed at the individual responsible for that dark and trying challenge. So that's why I'm asking you to join me on this front line. We're building a coalition to share stories, to build resources, and share the will to affect change in an industry where baseless attacks need real consequences and broken systems need fixing. Help me make today's fight tomorrow's strength. And that takes us to the first segment of our first episode. Let's dive in to allegation aftermath. Today we kick off our first installment of a segment we call Allegation Aftermath, with us sharing stories of fighting false claims with at least one key takeaway and strategies to protect yourself, because after all, change starts with us, and there is strength in numbers. I decided to film today's episode at my kitchen table, primarily to take some of the formality out of it and make it a more candid conversation. And typically, this isn't a conversation that you would have around your kitchen table. But for some of us, it's discussed widely around this table because it is something that may currently be a dominant part of your life. I may not be able to speak for all fiduciaries, but I know that when I was first introduced to this industry nearly 10 years ago as a case manager working for another licensed fiduciary, I immediately fell in love with it. I loved the fact that I could get up every day and know that what I was doing really was making a difference in somebody else's life. I knew right away that my intention was to get my license. Sure, as a case manager, my work was making a difference. But as guardian and/or conservator, I knew I could do even more to make a difference. These situations where senior citizen has been deemed by the court as being incapacitated leaves that individual feeling oftentimes depressed, angry, embittered, distrusting, and occasionally accusatory. In that instance, it really is, or at least it should be, pretty easy to empathize with what they're experiencing. I always tell my clients that I understand how they feel, which usually results in a response from them saying, "No, you don't." I kindly look at them and very calmly and gently say, "I do understand, because I know exactly how I would feel if I were in your shoes." Sometimes that helps to diffuse the situation. I do find that the relationships that you build with your client has to start with a good foundation. I have always tried to approach my clients and meet with them before the hearing, and have a conversation with them about the situation that they are in and what those specific circumstances have led to. It is all in your approach, is what I like to say. How do you approach your clients and break the news to them that they are now being considered incapacitated and having a guardian and conservator appointed to then essentially take over their lives? I would say that there are more success stories than failures in terms of the foundation and initial building blocks forming that relationship with my clients. Sometimes we are never fortunate enough to gain the client's trust or really build that strong bonded relationship. Sometimes those less than successful foundations and building blocks can lead to a client personally making false allegations against their guardian and or conservator. I think that I can say with a fair amount of certainty that most of us have had that experience, maybe once or twice, maybe often. If you really stop and think about it, anytime that happens, you really shouldn't be surprised or shocked. Just take a moment. If you need to close your eyes, then feel free to do so. But take that moment and imagine how you would feel if you were that individual. If you were wearing their shoes, how would you feel? Approaching it from that standpoint makes it a lot easier to get through the experience. You can empathize or sympathize. I know I certainly don't blame them. But what happens when a false allegation is made against a fiduciary by someone who is rather influential? Maybe somebody that has some type of an authoritative position. Oh, I don't know, like maybe a court-appointed attorney. What then? I know that some individuals watching this podcast at this moment may find that statement hard to believe, or at the very least, hard to wrap your head around. I never in a million years would have believed that that was something that was possible until I experienced it firsthand. Did you know that an attorney can file a petition alleging and accusing a licensed fiduciary of committing abhorrent and disgusting acts against the interests of their wards without basis in fact, without evidence, that they simply do not have to have any proof? Yep, I didn't know it either. In a criminal case, just the case, the district attorney making the allegation against an individual that they have committed a crime carries the burden of proof. It is not the defendant's responsibility to prove their innocence. It's the prosecuting attorney's side that has to prove their guilt. In probate courts, the ward's attorney can, does, and will file legal documents on behalf of the incapacitated adult, essentially acting as if they are the individual. Now, as you can imagine, reading a petition that is chock full of lies and false allegations, outright lies about you, that's hard enough. But then you're told that during the initial hearing, you cannot provide any type of statement or testimony in your own defense. No matter how much proof you have to prove you're innocent, you can say nothing. You can have a conversation with your attorney, you file your response and your objections, and you wait for that initial hearing. Now, I mentioned the rule that you are not allowed to provide testimony at the initial hearing. That is one of the system pieces that I would later discover is tragically broken. As you come nearer to the date of your initial hearing and you learn that the attorney has now filed an additional petition, it is at that initial hearing for the first petition that you are hit smack dab right between the eyes with the realization that your accuser has now moved the goalpost. The cold hard fact is that my accuser was in fact dictating exactly how this was going to play out. You see, by filing petition after petition, or pleading after pleading, they succeed in delaying the process. In fact, preventing you from being able to present your case and your evidence proving your innocence to the court. Not to mention the fact that repeated filings of various petitions and pleadings confuses the court, redirecting the focus somewhere else. And before you know it, the list of allegations has grown, and the initial petition filed is forgotten. Because of the rule that you cannot provide testimony in the initial hearing, you, as the fiduciary, are completely dependent on the skills and the fortitude of your attorney. Once you enter the courtroom for the initial hearing on the first petition that was filed, of course, you would hope that your attorney would fiercely and powerfully defend you, your honor, and your reputation. And that would aid in bringing the focus of the court back to the initial petition. Now, the question I would pose to you at this time is, do you know any attorney in this industry, or can you think of any attorney in this industry that is going to make a statement on the record calling out this situation for what it is, or call out the accuser for what he or she is? This is very difficult. After all, your accuser is someone who has achieved higher education and has clout and standing in the community, or at least, the very least, in the industry. And no doubt can be very influential, if you know what I mean. This nightmare went on for a year and a half, ultimately ending in a settlement agreement. But that settlement agreement came at a great cost to me, and an even bigger fiscal cost to the ward. I suffered a great deal of loss throughout this traumatic experience. I lost working relationships with other professionals that specialize in various industries that are quite important and useful to fiduciaries. People that I had worked with many times over the last 10 years. I lost friends in this process. I lost referrals for new cases because I didn't have time to follow up. I lost time that could have been and should have been spent, better spent, focusing on the caseload that I have, which in turn caused me to become overwhelmingly backlogged and overdue on tasks that I am ordered to and expected to carry out. I have still not made a full recovery and gotten caught up on everything that I need to get done. It has also interfered in my ability to devote myself to my clients on a personal level in the way that I had always taken pride in. You see, I become very personally invested in my clients. They're not just a number to me. They're not just a signed check to pay my invoices. They're not just, oh, let's do this so we can make money. My clients are like an extension of my family. Many of them don't have any family, and you become the closest thing that they have to a family member. Spending time to get to know your clients is part of that foundation and building blocks that I spoke of earlier. So if you have a client that has dementia and a year and a half goes by and you haven't gotten to spend much quality time with them, well, you likely just lost your ability to ever build a bonded relationship on a good foundation. There are so many traumatic experiences throughout this whole ordeal. So many, in fact, that this podcast would not afford me enough time to tell you how it all went down. The hardest part for me is that concluding everything with the settlement agreement never provided vindication for me, never gave me that opportunity to go on record and prove that I'm innocent. It never resulted in consequences or recourse directed at the individual responsible for all of this. It was just merely an opportunity for me to be able to move on with my life, with my business, and try to fix everything that was going so wrong. Everything that was going so wrong because my focus, my energy, my drive, my determination, quite frankly, my why was systematically and methodically stolen from me. My hope is that by telling my story, that it brings a bit of a spotlight to one of the darkest corners of the industry. Maybe it will inspire other licensed fiduciaries to come forward and tell their story. This was absolutely the most difficult experience I've ever had to endure, and still maintain a level of professionalism, not to mention my sanity. It was made to feel a million times worse by the fact that there was nowhere for me to turn, no support, really, no ability to provide the truth to the court, and the hopelessness that you feel when you realize that any avenue that you could have taken likely would have led you nowhere. The fear that overcomes people at the mere thought of speaking the truth or exposing corruption on any level is just mind-blowing to me. My mission in this journey is to provide a safe space for those of us in this situation, in this industry, to come together to have these conversations. They're very candid conversations that need to be had. I want everybody out there to know that you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to face this situation alone because we are here. We just need to find our way to one another so that we can be that support system, so that we can create a web of resources that are available to us, and to provide exposure to the corruption and to fix those broken pieces of our system that so desperately needs to be fixed, so that our wards no longer suffer the unnecessary stress and expense that this type of situation brings. We will no longer have to suffer the losses that we endure all across our life, both personal and professional. I'm determined to build a coalition of licensed fiduciaries that want to work together to fight for the injustices, to fight to make the changes that need to take place. There are currently no protections in place for licensed fiduciaries. In spite of this period in my life being kind of traumatic, I have to say that there are so many things that I've learned from this process. Ways that I feel I can build upon what we learn when we study for the exam or any classes that we've taken in college. And you know, we have this basic idea of what we are supposed to be doing, kind of a textbook version, very basic. I'm going to do the best I can to provide the tools that we all need to protect ourselves in these situations. Help you to analyze or assess your written policies and procedures, your documentation methods and processes, and many more. We have developed a fiduciary checklist of sorts as a resource tool for you to assess how much protection you are providing yourself. Come and join me on this front line. Come and join me in this fight. There is strength in numbers, and we need more of us to stand side by side and march into this battle, because it's winning these battles that wins the war. So thank you for letting me take some time to share my story with you. And I would love to hear your stories. So if any of you have similar stories to tell, I want to hear them. You can draft your story and send it in an email to fiduciary.frontline@gmail.com. Fiduciary.frontline@gmail.com. Let's do this together.